Well, you will have opportunity today to make a name for yourselves, as what we are going to do is have a little spontaneous play with some of you volunteers that will be recorded and will be seen all over the world in the next half year or so. So what I need is some volunteers to do this. Now, what we need to bear in mind here is the enormous tension that is building. He has just come off of the father arguments. He has really had scathing denunciations. He had called them children of the devil, twice as much a child as hell that you make them, and all the rest of it. And the Sanhedrin is tough and upset. And then we run into the adulterous woman just before this. They are so frustrated, they don't know what to do, trying to stone him. And then comes this scene, which is like kicking him in the head. This little blind man gets on the scene and takes enormous courage, and the Pharisees can hardly stand it. I want you to get that growing tension. Pretty soon after this, he'll be done with his urban ministry of the Judean ministry and move on to the suburban ministry with the 70 when he calls them. Then he'll come back to finish up. Okay, here we go. Are we all set? Okay, here we go. Now, as Jesus passed by, he saw a man who was blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, saying,
Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?
Jesus answered,
Neither this man nor his parents sinned, but that the works of God should be revealed in him. I must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. The night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am blind of the world.
When he had said these things, he spat on the ground and made clay with the saliva, and he anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay. And he said to him,
Go, wash in the pool of Siloam.
Which is translated sent. So he went and washed and came back seeing. Therefore the neighbors and those who previously had seen that he was blind said,
Is not this he who sat and begged?
Some said,
This is he.
Others said,
Is he like him?
He said,
I am he.
Therefore they said to him,
How are your eyes open?
He answered and said,
A man called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes and said to me, Go to the pool of Siloam and walk. So I went and walked, and I received sight.
Then they said to him, Where'd you get that funny dialect? No. Then they said to him,
Where is he?
He said,
I don't know.
They brought him who was formerly blind to the Pharisees. Now it was, as always, a Sabbath when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. Then the Pharisees also asked him again how he had received his sight. He said to them,
I put clay on my eyes, and I washed, and I see.
Therefore some of the Pharisees said,
This man is not from God, because he does not keep the Sabbath.
Others said,
How can a man who is a sinner do such signs?
and there was a division among them. They said to the blind man again,
What do you say about him because he opened your eyes?
He said,
He is a prophet.
But the Jews did not believe concerning him that he had been blind and received his sight until they called the parents of him who had received his sight. And they asked him, saying,
Is this your son, who you say was born blind? Then how then does he now see?
His parents answered them and said,
We know that this is our son, and that he was born blind. But by what means he sees we do not know, or who opened his eyes we do not know. He is of age, ask him, he will speak for himself.
His parents said these things because they feared the Jews, for the Jews had agreed already that if anyone confessed that he was Christ, he would be put out of the synagogue. Therefore his parents said,
He is of age. Ask him.
So they again called the man who was blind and said to him,
Give God the glory. We know that this man is a sinner.
He answered and said,
Whether he is a sinner or not, I do not know. One thing I know, that though I was blind, now I see.
Then they said to him again,
What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?
He answered them,
I told you already, and you did not listen? Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciple?
Then they reviled him and said,
You are his disciple, but we are Moses' disciple. We know that God spoke to Moses. As for this fellow, we do not know where he is from.
The man answered and said to them,
Why, this is a marvelous thing. That you cannot yes, he has opened my eyes. Now we know that God does not hear sinners. But if anyone is a worshiper of God and does his will, he hears him. Since the world began, it has been unheard of that anyone opened the eyes of one who was born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing.
They answered and said to him,
You were completely born in sins, and are you teaching us?
and they cast him out. Jesus heard that they had cast him out, and when he found him, he said to him, when they found him, he said to him,
Do you believe in the Son of God?
he answered and said,
Who is he, Lord, that I may believe in him?
and Jesus said to him,
You have both seen him, and it is he who is talking with you.
then he said,
Lord, I believe.
and he worshipped him, and Jesus said,
For judgment I have come into this world, that those who do not see may see, and the those who see may be made blind.
Then some of the Pharisees who were with him heard these words, and said to him,
Are we blind also?
Jesus said to them,
If you were blind, you would have no sin, but now you say you see, therefore your sin remains.
very good, thank you guys. Little hand. That was good. You did a good job, all of you. I really love this story. Don't you? Do you feel a kinship to this? I think of this guy. He had been born blind. He had sat there his whole life begging, basically. And he knew everything that went on in the temple. He knew who the Pharisees were. He knew the whole deal. And Jesus comes along and heals. Now, what was the question they asked? That is such an interesting question and a very important concept to get hold of. What question did they ask? Look at it on page 129. Rabbi, who sinned? His disciples asked this man or his parents, that he was born blind. Did you notice that clause coming up later in the thing? That's what the Pharisees finally say. That's what people really thought. If there was this kind of condition from birth, it was something either he had done, it's hard to figure out how he could have sinned from birth, or something that his parents had done. If a child is born in a handicapped way, it's a product of sin. Who sinned, this man or his parents, that he would be this way? And that's what the Pharisees, every time they saw him, they said, boy, somebody sinned to do this. Now here's an important principle. Better get hold of this in life. Life is so bright for you guys right now. Everything out there is glorious. Somebody in this room will marry and have a child that has a problem. It's that simple. Any of you know children like that? And you have to realize, here's an important principle. Look what Jesus says. It was not this man that sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be made manifested in him. This was for the glory of God. You got to get hold of that. Tell me the story of Moses. Tell me the story of Moses. Tell me the story of Moses. God approaches Moses and says, Moses, I want you to be my spokesman. What's Moses say? What's that? I'm slow of speech. That's what he said. Okay? Took him a long time. What did God say to him in the answer? What? Did I not make the blind and the lame and the deaf? I, God. Do you hear that? Hear that. It's not hard. I mean, it is hard. It's not easy to say, for the glory of God. Is it? But that's the answer here. For this appropriate moment, when the Pharisees are so fed up with Jesus, they're trying to kill him. and the people are muttering in the background, and they don't know what to say. Here comes this blind man who will say to them, now cured, do you want to become his disciples too? Is that wonderful? I tell you what. He's one of the first guys I want to meet after we meet the Godhead. You know how this? I think that will be first, don't you? But in time, we'll get to mingle with all these dear ones. And he's such a neat guy. Jesus says it's not this man that sinned or his parents. Now, sometimes the sin of the parents do impact on the kids. If you're a druggie and you bear a child, the kid's born that way. If you smoke, the kid is underweight. If you're an alcoholic, so is the child. The sin of the parents can be visited on the children. Not here. So, in an act of grace, he, as we have heard twice now, makes spittle, anoints a man's eyes, and he goes and washes in the pool of Siloam. And here's this understated verse. So he went and washed and came back seeing. He had never seen Jesus yet. That's why he didn't recognize. He didn't know who he was. And the neighbors, hey, look, it's the beggar. Some said it's him, others said, no, it's not him. Why would they say that? Why wouldn't you recognize this guy? He's been sitting there all his life. Yeah, they had never seen his face. They only saw his forehead. You know, they had never looked him. Can I say this? Even looked him in the eye. They had never done that. They never saw him up vertical walking around. Maybe with the stick and the dog. They had never seen him this way before. They could hardly recognize him. They'd always look down on him. The picture I always have is a man with a cup of pencils saying, 5 pennies for a pencil, you know. Doing something like that. Begging. Isn't this, I don't know, it looks like him, but, well, this is a strange thing. The guy's standing there, and so they say, is this the blind man? What do you think? Is this the blind man? And the blind man says, I'm the blind man. Yeah, he knew it. Ask him. He's very, what kind of personality does he have? He's kind of outgoing type. He's an extrovert. He's not bashful. And they said, how are your eyes open? He said, this man called Jesus. I've never seen him. Anointed my eyes, said, do this, I did, and received my sight. Where is he? I don't know. How would I know? I've never seen him, and I have never seen this place, actually. I couldn't tell you what street this is. Now I can, but, you know. So, third scene, they brought to the Pharisees a man who had been formerly blind. It was the Sabbath day. It was a Sabbath day. Oh, again the Sabbath day. Now, what should they have done when they saw this man born blind? What should they have done?
Jesus did it.
Pardon?
Jesus did it when his eye was healed.
You know, they should recognize that a healer, a strong, mighty man from God was on the scene. But concerning him himself, what should they have done? Praise the Lord. Yeah, not it's the Sabbath again. Praise the Lord. This guy's been blind all these years. And I didn't like these people. We've seen already they didn't like the people. Excuse me. They didn't like the people over whom they ruled. They had called them, as for these people, you know, we've not believed, but this accursed crowd. And he was especially accursed because he was born blind. Their religion did not go very far into their heart of emotion. A man's been blind all these years, and all they want to do is have an inquisition of theology. What kind of a heart is that? And they asked him how he received it, and he told them. Some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God. He does not keep the Sabbath. Will they never accept that? I mean, what argument did Jesus use over and over again to disprove it? Won't you help an ox in a ditch? Why shouldn't I heal a human being on the Sabbath? You have more compassion on animals than you do on people. He can't be from God. He doesn't keep the Sabbath. You remember right from the beginning, Jesus tried to pop this bubble of Sabbath keeping. And it's just not happening. They keep hanging on to the traditions instead of taking the reality of the Messiah. Others said, how can a man who's a sinner do these signs? And there was a division. So they said to the blind man, what do you think? He said, he's a prophet. He's not sure where he's going, but he's got to be a man from God. The Jews did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight, so they called the parents of the man to check it out with him. His parents answered, but they didn't answer. They said, he's old enough, ask him. And he tells us why. Because they'd get thrown out of the synagogue. They would be cut off from life in the world, in their world of Judaism, if they took one statement that could be of any worth to Jesus. They had already decided that. Anybody agrees with him, out of our system. And they knew that. That meant everything to the Jews. They don't go over to the Romans and say, I want you for friends now. Romans hated him. They couldn't move to Samaria. They hated him. They became a spiritual leper for all practical purposes. They feared the Jews. Is that a terrible thing? To fear the people in authority? To fear your parents? To fear the elders? To fear the religious leaders? What a terrible way. Some of you in Survey of Doctrine saw Martin Luther, the film. To fear the church. To be damned by the church. They use that as a terrible club. A terrible club to get money. But to fear people in authority is a terrible way to have to live. They feared their religious leaders, the ones they should not fear. If anybody should not be feared, it's the people who are responsible for your soul's welfare. They should be motivated out of caring for the people. They shouldn't be feared. They feared the Jews, so they said, ask him. And page 131 is great. The Sanhedrin, the Pharisees are so angry by the time this is over. You'll see it at the bottom of the page. They cast him out. Can you imagine? They're having this interview, and the next thing you see is this blind man tumbling down the steps as they cast him out of their presence. Second time, they called the blind man. Give God the praise. We know that this man who healed you is a sinner. He says, oh, that's strange. I don't know who he is. I don't know. One thing I do know, I can see you now and I never could before. That's a great statement. One thing I know, once I was blind, now I can see. And that's a wonderful testimony. It's not only a physical statement, that's a spiritual statement that you and I can make very readily, can't we? Once I was blind, now we see. It's a wonderful statement. They said to him, explain again what he did. I've told you already. And look at this little rebuke. You would not listen. As soon as I told you, you went into a rant about breaking the Sabbath and all that kind of stuff. Why do you want to hear it again? How do you think they felt when he asked them this question? Do you want to become his disciples? Can you can see their temperature just going up. They reviled him. You are his disciples. We are disciples of Moses. We know God's spoken to Moses. That's the mission. We don't know where it comes from. Well, they said where he came from. Can't any good thing come out of Galilee, no prophets ever come out of Galilee. And another time they said earlier the Messiah is going to be born in Bethlehem, so he can't be that. Ooh. We're disciples of Moses. And the man says, oh, this is really a marvel. You don't know where he comes from. He opened my eyes. God's never done that. You know that God does not listen to sinners? If anyone is a worshiper of God and does his will, God never since the world began has there been a record of what happened to me? That someone opened the eyes of a man born blind? He must come from God. And they said, you're trying to teach us? We're the Sanhedrin. You're the blind man born in utter sin. You've been sitting there all those years as a result of your sin, or some sin. You were born in utter sin, and you're not going to teach us. And they threw him down the steps. And Jesus finds him. He says, do you believe in the Son of Man? He said, who is he, sir, that I may believe? I am. And he believed, and he worshipped him. And then Jesus gives this big lesson. For judgment I came into this world, that those who do not see may see, like this blind man, and that those who see may become blind. Some of the Pharisees says, are we blind? Jesus said, it'd been better if you would be blind, because now you'd be seeing spiritually. Against this story of these terrible shepherds who care little about the sheep is this wonderful story of the Good Shepherd. You know why Jesus brings the Good Shepherd deal to bear here? Because he's right there where the shepherds of Israel operate. They're the ones that were to take care of the sheep. And they were terrible. This accursed crowd. What a way to talk about your sheep. As for you, you were born in utter sin. You would teach us. What terrible shepherds. And Jesus leaves that scene and starts talking about the Good Shepherd story. Now in the Gospel of John, this Good Shepherd story is in chapter 10. And I want you to notice this. It is interrupted on page 135 by Jesus going into the suburban ministry, and then you go all the way to the end of the Judean ministry, and at the top of 147, the 70 return. This is concluding the suburban ministry, and on 148 he picks up this same theme. You notice that it's at a different time. It was the Feast of Dedication at Jerusalem. There's a big time gap in between the first beginning of the Good Shepherd Discourse and the conclusion of the Good Shepherd Discourse. That doesn't show up in John at all. As you read John 10, you just read through this whole thing. But there's this interlude of the suburban ministry, and then he comes back, and when he comes back to where the bad shepherds are, he picks up the theme of the Good Shepherd. Does that make sense? When he leaves the city, he's not talking to the bad shepherds, so he doesn't talk about that. He goes out, and what we will see in this passage, and we'll cover this very quickly, is a lot of the same teaching of the Galilean ministries, what Luke picks up. It's the same kind of teaching. We'll see the Lord's Prayer taught again, Sermon on the Mount issues, very much the same. And then he comes back after the 70 have gone into all the towns and villages of Judea. He comes back to Jerusalem and picks up this Good Shepherd concept again. Excuse me. This is a wonderful, wonderful discourse. The first discourse is a discourse on discipleship. That's the Sermon on the Mount. The second discourse, the Bread of Life discourse, is a discourse on salvation. This is a discourse on security, God's security in dealing with us. He talks about us as sheep. And what he will establish is we are his sheep before we ever come to faith. We are secure. We are in his hands. He is in the Father's hands. We are eternally secure. The Good Shepherd Discourse is a discourse on security. So here it is. Truly I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs in another way, is a thief and a robber. He who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the gatekeeper opens. Sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. They won't follow a stranger. And in this, Jesus is saying, I'm the good shepherd. I'm the door to the sheepfold. My sheep know me. And this is what he's going to say. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they might have life and have it abundantly.